Who are these people? They are the people who are absolutely angry about their economic less fortune. They are upset because the value of their currency has gone down the drain and there is no end in their misery.
Well, is Iran's ruling establishment nearing the end of its life? Before we can answer that question, we need to first know just who these protesters are. What are their demands? And how long this could go on for, potentially? Those questions are back as a new round of protests spreads across the country, the first major protest since the 12-day war. We're joined by Shayan Samii, former U.S. government appointee who served across intelligence and foreign policy roles, Arash Azizi, journalist and author of What Iranians Want, Women, Life, Freedom, and Danny Citrinowicz, the former head of the Iran branch in the Israeli military intelligence.
Iran, in every way, is doing worse now than it was 20 years ago, right? Economically, is doing worse. International relations is doing worse. Culturally, is doing worse. Politically, is more repressive, right? Who wants that?
So even if they will find some sort of cosmetic solution, the problem will stay.
And later, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu meet in Florida, and Israeli officials are openly talking about regime change in Iran. We'll break that down with Eyre, the former Persian-language spokesperson for the US State Department, Alex Vatanka, the founder of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute, and Joseph Epstein, the Middle East and Eurasia analyst, the director of the Turan Research Center at the Yorktown Institute.
That I have certainly not ever seen this level of hopelessness inside the Iranian regime.
To keep in mind that Iran is a nation of 90 million people, whereas Israel is about 1/10 of the size.
How would regime change unfold? It's like the book by Charles Kurtzman, The Unthinkable Revolution. No one knows. And anyone who tells you that he or she does know is wrong.
And then, what makes this wave of protests different and potentially stronger? We'll dive into that with analysis from Bozorgmehr Sharifidin, the head of digital at Iran International, a former Reuters journalist, and co-author of a forthcoming book on Iran.
This protest is not about inflation. It's not about stagnation. This is about the collapse of Iranian economy.
I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Protests that began inside the electronics and mobile departments of a mall in Tehran have spread, and they've spread fast. What started as economic frustration is now openly challenging the system itself. So who are these protesters, and how much longer could this go on for? Joining us is Shayan Samii, a Middle East and intelligence analyst, Arash Azizi, Iran expert and author, and Danny Citrinowicz with the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So the question that I'm asked a lot lately, and I'm sure you guys are being asked the same thing, is, is this the beginning of the end? Does this signal the end of the Islamic Republic? And the answer that I always give is, it's a little too early. It's premature, and anything could really happen. We don't know at this point. But in order to even think about answering that question, I think the most important thing we need to ask first is, who are these protesters? What are they chanting? What is this all about? Shayan, let's start with you. Who are these protesters?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your program, and with a greetings of Happy New Year to all those who celebrate. Who are these people? They are the people who are absolutely angry about their economic less fortune. They are upset because the value of their currency has gone down the drain and there is no end in their economic misery. The government has no response for it, and the government continues to blame the same old rhetoric that, hey, it's because of the sanctions, it's because of the enemy, and because of all of these repeated rigmarole of not having a good answer, the government is in a standstill, and the people are upset, and the people are realizing, hey, I have nothing to lose. There is nothing to look forward to. So they are coming out in droves. They are expressing their dissatisfaction, and they are really threatening the government's modus operandi of thinking that, hey, if we blame the sanctions, if we blame the West, if we blame Israel, everything is going to be happy for us. So the people are upset. It is a combination of the Bazaaris who are aligning themselves with the regular folks. It is the students who are upset about their lack of growth opportunities and lack of economic sustainability, morphed with lack of civic engagement and freedom. So all of this put together, it's a whole bunch of people who are upset, and they're trying to get ahead, and the government has really no response for it. And I'm sure that in the next few days, they're going to be coming out in droves and trying to beat up on the protesters.
So, Arash, what do you think? Like, are there specific groups? Shayan mentioned students, people who are upset with the economy. Are there unions coming out? The truckers had mentioned that they would be joining in too. And we're labeling this as like nationwide protests, but give me a sense of the depth. Like, just how big is this movement at this point? And do you think how long do you think this is going to go on for? I think that's the next major question.
Yeah, so this is a pattern we've always seen in this sorts of protests in Iran the last few years. It's become typical by now. Today, for example, we had protests in the city of Fasa in the Fars province. Many people don't know even where it is. I mean, non-Iranians, but this is a pretty major sort of provincial center in Fars province. We had protests in Qeshm Island. I remember in 2017 there was a joke that the protests were sort of a geography lesson in Iran because they were happening in all these towns that nobody had even heard of. So the point is that there is discontent everywhere. There's economic discontent everywhere. There's different sorts of discontent. There's discontent with the regime as a whole. So when there is an opportunity, people really come out. I should also add that throughout the year, not just at times of sort of mass nationwide protests, there are protests happening in Iran all the time. If you on any average week, pensioners protest, workers protest, trade unions, as you mentioned, protest. But when there is an opportunity for them to gather up and mushroom into broader mass movements, people use them, and also more news of them gets around. People resort to more political slogans. However, effectively, what we've seen now, it's fourth day. Of course, no one can predict whether they'll go on for longer or not, whether they'll find momentum, whether they'll catch fire and go bigger. There were similar protests about a year ago. We just don't remember it because they didn't go on after a couple of days. There were similar protests, in the Iranian bazaar. It also depends on what kind of concessions the government can give. Its first concession, which doesn't mean anything on its own, was the change of the central bank governor. If Hemmati can take some macroeconomic measures to have the dollar slide down and stuff, this could make a change. Although it could also make a surprising change. Sometimes when people feel like, oh, okay, we protested, we got some stuff, means they'll protest more. The problem, though, the strategic problem that has long been there for those who actually take the slogan of, down with the regime or death to dictators seriously, for those who seriously want to change the power pattern in Iran, the strategic problem is that they lack leadership. They lack organization. Trade unions, for example, in a country like Tunisia, let's say in 2011, there was a trade union confederation that effectively could lead the revolution and bring about regime change, right? We don't have anything like that in Iran. We have trade unions, however, they're not large enough. They don't represent the majority of Iranian workers, or even let's say 20% of the Iranian workers. They're small here and there, and it's sort of confederal trade union confederations that exist in the country are more aspirational, right? They're leftist activists, workers activists who would like to lead a trade union confederation, but they don't in effect, right? So the strategic problem is one that has been there a long time, is that there's a lack of organization, and that there is lack of a vehicle, a political vehicle or political leadership that could link up different protests and push them forward and make differences, in the response of the security forces. At any rate, at this stage, we are far away from anything like that. What we have is just another round of protests, but that could continue to go on, but it's not unclear. It's unclear if they would.
So what you're saying is a lack of cohesive leadership within Iran itself.
or it could be abroad. I mean, there was, it is possible if Iranian politics, you cannot separate exile or inside Iran, right? If there was a leadership abroad that really commanded loyalty of many Iranians inside Iran, it could make the difference, right? It could, because what it would end up as, it would negotiate on behalf of the Iranian protesters with power, and then finally engineer a transition. But I have to smile when I say that, because of course we have nothing of the sort, right? And of course, if you had such a situation, one of the first things that would happen is the security forces would defect to you, right? They would defect to the side of the opposition, and you would have that sort of changes. Effectively, you have nothing of the sort. You have really nothing of the sort. So what you have is a lot of protests in Iran. People definitely want the regime gone, but they don't yet have the strategies to replace it, which means also that there will be, which means that the government can take the initiative. Different figures inside the regime can take initiative, change things, make differences, and placate the protesters or suppress them successfully, as they unfortunately have on previous occasions. It is important and notable that President Pezeshkian this time around has said that he wants to talk to the representatives of protesters. One of the
that's what I found interesting, is that he was like, but I want to speak to the opposition. I mean, some analysts are saying he probably did that because he knows that nobody's going to step forward in this case.
I mean, in some cases there might be localized, let's say in Tabriz, I'm sure the head of the Bazaaris will talk to him and others. But the question is, okay, you talk to the protesters, what meaningful concessions can you give them? And as I said, the other problem is, so Pezeshkian doesn't even control most power in Iran anyways. So he can't even say, I won't kill you to the protesters, because the IRGC and the militias are doing that already. They're attacking on the people, right? But also, what meaningful concessions can he give? And if he does give meaningful political concessions of any sort, that might embolden people to go and ask for more. So it's not an easy solution.
Might have the opposite effect, yeah.
Exactly, and it's not an easy solution, because Pezeshkian is not an easy condition for Pezeshkian, because he is effectively a very meek prime minister for Khamenei, right? His role has, Iranian presidents used to have some independence actually, or some power of their own. He has effectively been a very loyal prime minister for Khamenei. He's more akin to like prime ministers like under Assad regime in Syria before than independent presidents. So there's this is not true ideologically, but it's true functionally, right? Functionally, he himself admits that he doesn't have much power to do much. Now he changed the central bank governor, as I said.
Who was then a Rouhani appointee, and they just replaced the one who was a hardliner Raisi appointee.
Yeah,
and
this
he
was important.
Was an economic minister as well.
Yes, he was economic minister. He had been impeached by the hardliner dominated parliament. I mean, a lot of today sort of events can also be explained as part of this dynamics between a hardliner dominated parliament and a reformist president. In fact, similar things were at work in 2017 and 2019, because it was the Rouhani administration, and hardliners effectively encouraged protests against it actually at some points. But of course it got out of hand and then became anti-regime protests. So these are all part of the domestic dynamics.
And Danny, what do you make of what you've heard so far? And also, given your background from an intelligence perspective, what kind of indicators do you look out for when there's cracks in the regime, when a regime is about to fall? And do you see any of those signs in place right now with the protests that are happening?
Well, first of all, good evening from the country that every demonstration in Iran becomes toppling the regime. And the prayers are, and the prayers are starting here in Israel. When are you going to see the end of this regime? And we are fighting hard to make people understand that it's not that quick, and not we have to wait and see how things develop. Actually, I have to say one important thing based again on the my esteemed colleague said. I think that the main problem that Pezeshkian has, the regime has, that it has no silver bullet solution to the economical problems in Iran. They can switch the central bank governor, they can sack, they can appoint. Even Khamenei can decide to sack Pezeshkian, whatever. But it's not going to help them. Because at the end of the day, the problems are so in deep in terms of sanctions, but not only sanctions, corruption, just involvement in the economy, all those things that it's not going to change in a day. So even if they will find some sort of cosmetic solution, the problem will stay. It won't go away. So this regime is going to be challenged with many things. We have to return back to Pezeshkian against Jalili fight, and we remember that Pezeshkian promised lifting of sanctions because he knew that this is one of the basic things to move forward, but they cannot do that because of the
He couldn't
stalemate
do
in
that.
negotiation with the US. He cannot, because they won't forgo the enrichment in Iran. So it's a no-go in terms of the US administration. So in that regard, I don't know what will happen in the discussion. Nobody knows. But I think that in the end of the day, I totally agree that there is no position. But even if miracle will happen, it will have a opposition gathered and they find some leader or whatever, then I don't think that at the end of the day, things will change in terms of the Iranian economy because of the basic fault it has right now. It will take time. So I think that definitely, even if the demonstration will end today or tomorrow, will sometime in the future they will resume. I think that the regime has a mounting challenge in front of him because of the scale and the fact we're on the fourth day of the demonstration. But we have to remember that this regime withstand much fiercer demonstration in the past. So we have to take that to consideration. And not everyone, in Israeli TV, you see people shouting, "Death to the dictator, return back the Shah," whatever. We keep saying, okay, whatever. And the Shah won't return back to Iran. It's not going to happen. Or the son of the Shah, whatever. But it is what it is. We have to be very realistic in what we are saying. I think that, of course, we have to pay a closer look whether this demonstration is going to continue, whether they're going to be all over Iran, in all classes, whether they're going to see mass defectors from the regime itself, whether the regime is going to use harsh force and then it will be counterproductive. All the things, it's obvious we have to see them, but we have to remember one important thing. This is something that we don't know how it's going to develop. And those who are saying it's the beginning of the end of regime, they don't know what they're talking about. I'm not saying it's not going to happen now in the future, but we have to be very cautious in how we're assessing things. I remember same thing happened with the demonstration of Mahsa Amini. Same thing happened, with the fuel a couple of years ago, and of course with the Green Revolution. Everybody think about, this is the end. This is the end. I personally think that as long as Khamenei is there, it won't be the end. But again, it's my own personal assessment. But we have to wait and see. Last but not least, I'm keep saying also here in Israel and to the West, I think it's extremely important. Do not intervene in what's happening in Iran. We have no ability to influence in a way that we think we can influence. I think the regime, hoping that we'll try to overtly influence the demonstration, because they are saying it's a plot designed by the US and Israel. So we have to be very cautious in what we're doing, not operating bots that everybody knows will belong to in terms of trying to incite in Iran itself. I think we have to stay vigilant. We have to see how things develop, but we have to stay outside of those developments. If there will be a dramatic change in Iran, it will come from within, from the Iranian people. It won't come from Israel or US deciding to initiate, working with Elon Musk to open more satellite channels. It's not going to happen. But that's nothing. Again, the bottom line of things right now, I think the events are highly interesting in terms of things happening. It's not surprising given the what happened to this regime in the last year. I think Pezeshkian talked about it. So many bad things that happened. I'm not talking about even the rising law operation, the droughts and the economic situation, then the snapback. All those things led to that. I think it's not surprising, but we have to be very cautious in how we are assessing things will develop towards the future. And I'm still saying to my friends also in Israel and to the media in Israel, don't jump into the wrong conclusion. I don't know what will happen. Nobody knows what will happen. But this regime is still very, very strong, know how to deal with that, know how to dismantle any opposition that he can detect. So I think in that aspect, let's wait and see.
And, Danny just brought up a really good point. Shayan, I wanted to ask you. He mentioned how fierce are the protests and the protesters themselves. How would you describe it?
The protesters are fierce. The protesters are basically selfless individuals. While a couple of days ago, we had a picture reminiscent of the Tiananmen Square event that one man stood in front of tanks. And this young man just sat in the middle of the street looking at all the brutal force that was looking down on him. So people are upset. People have had it with it. The only issue is that, number one, in the previous uprisings, we have had a series of opposition groups and opposition leaders who expressed their solidarity, but because of the fraction that existed, they could not deliver a knockout blow to the Islamic Republic. What we are seeing right now is that at least one of the groups, the pro Crown Prince group, they have solidified under his name. They are calling his name, but the other groups have not solidified their thought process and their requirements under a leadership. That is what the Islamic Republic is rooting for. The Islamic Republic is rooting to find wedges so they could drive a comparative issue between the groups and say, hey, these guys don't know what they're talking about. These guys don't know what they're doing. The only difference is my colleague Danny mentioned something, and I agree with the fact that any change will happen from within and from the people of Iran. But one thing that we need to keep at it is that Western governments need to keep their support for the people of Iran and vocalize it. The Islamic Republic is going to use its propaganda machine to say, oh, this is an Israeli attempt. This is a U.S. attempt. Whether the U.S. says anything or not, the Islamic Republic is going to use that propaganda apparatus. So the people of Iran are demanding, they are yearning for a sustained support. And I don't mean that they have to do something or militarily attack Iran, but sustain their support. Don't be lackadaisical. Don't be whimsical, and don't go for immediate gratification with the Islamic Republic in order to feel like, hey, we can just postpone their achievement of nuclear weapons or military might until we get to the next level. The people of Iran are asking sustained support, sustained efforts, and maximum pressure on the government of the Islamic Republic, and it will fall within itself.
And given your background, Shayan, with the U.S. government and the State Department, what are you seeing then in terms of how the Americans are responding at this point? How would you assess it?
That's a key point you're raising. The U.S. government right now is on a wait and see kind of an approach, because on one hand, President Trump has no qualms about supporting Israel in whatever decision Israel makes, especially given that Israel is going and following the Begin doctrine that if any country or any entity wants to attack Israel, especially with weapons of mass destruction, we're going to preemptive strike and knock the hell out of them. And this is exactly what President Trump mentioned a couple of days ago in Mar-a-Lago. So the State Department basically is waiting to see behind the scenes what kind of agreements they can reach on potentially other issues with Israel, and then give Israel the green light that if the Islamic Republic goes on an attack, which their former national security advisor, Shamkhani, has mentioned a couple of days ago, that we don't have to wait for the U.S. Attack or Israeli attack. We might go on offense ourselves. And that is exactly what U.S. is waiting for. The Islamic Republic takes the first stupid step forward, and then they're going to go after them.
And Danny, what would that do to this protest movement happening inside Iran if there is that second round of strikes between Iran and Israel? Because if you remember, the June strikes happened just a little bit after the truckers' protests in Iran, and that just quickly died down.
Yeah, I'll answer that important question. Just want to say one important thing about, regime change in Iran. I think that everybody think that regime change has to be positive. I think it can be very negative. We don't know what will happen next, even if there's going to be a regime change. We could find ourselves in a more radical Iran, if IRGC elements will take over. So I think that, when people think about, the solution to our problem is regime change in Iran, maybe, but we have to understand that we can find ourselves in another more pessimistic or negative options. So even here, we have to be very wary about the fact that things can turn sour, even if they're going to be like some sort of a regime change. To your important question, I think that definitely if Israel will intervene kinetically, it will be counterproductive. Because in the end of the day, like we saw on the June events, that actually the regime used the Israeli attacks to push the Iranians to rally around the Iranian flag. Of course, as we know, as we see now, it didn't solve his legitimacy problems and the problem that it has in Iran itself. But I think for a short period of time, it actually eased the pressure over the regime that actually was able to illustrate to the Iranian public that the war is against Iran and not against the regime itself. So I think that everything that we will do in order to kinetically will help the regime and not going to be counterproductive in terms of the riots and the demonstrations. So I think that's one thing we have to remember. I agree that we have to be vocal in terms of the support again, but we have to be very cautious in really perceiving ourselves as intervening, because again, it will also serve the Iranian regime way of thinking, and of course the way and propaganda. One thing I think that when we look at again how Israel sees things, we had a very important meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump discussing also based on reports today on the possibility of a second Israeli strike in Iran, now aimed against the missile development in Iran and the fact that they're rebuilding the capacity. I think that definitely the domestic events in Iran will have a strong influence on that, because again, if there are going to be some sort of dramatic change in Iran, definitely it will influence that. And if not, I think that it's quite safe to say that sometime during 2026 we'll have another clash between Israel and Iran, assuming that we'll have the backing of the US. So that's on top of everything happening right now in Iran. We have to remember also the high chances, the high probability of another clash between Israel and Iran. Again, that if it will happen in the near future, will actually backfires in terms of any hope of regime change. But I think at the end of the day, if Iran continues its force buildup, especially in the missile one, I think Israel won't be able to stay aside and will have to do something based on the doctrine of Netanyahu. So on top of all of the things, we probably will see that happening during 2026.
Yeah, something to definitely look out for in the coming weeks and months. And Arash, just paint us a picture of these protests. You know, are we seeing Gen Z out there, for example? And when people are protesting, are they coming out during the day, at night? Is it a couple of hours, the whole day? Like how? I just want to get an idea of the depth of this protest movement right now.
No, these are really good questions, because they bring me to another point, which is that what happens is that these protests start with broad demands, and they include sort of very different people. So they were like merchants coming out. Obviously, merchants come out for because they're fed up. Particularly, they were merchants. The first sort of bazaars that came out were people who are into electronics industries, which are heavily reliant on currency, right? So when the currency goes high, right, it really messes up. And actually, something I haven't seen discussed, there was a global fall in the gold price of gold, which I think also hit Iranians economically hard, because with the currency problems, a lot of Iranians put their hope in gold. So when that goes down, and it goes down because it's supposed to go up at the end of a year. So a lot of people come in, they put their money on, but as a result, it goes down. So so you have, let's say you have someone who owns a little mobile store in Tehran who comes out and joins this protest. This person also is just fed up from the mullahs, generally fed up with the regime. So he might even join in on some of the other chants. But then you have students, for example, who are traditionally, a little left-leaning often. I mean, even if they're not left-leaning, they're progressive broadly. And they like to join protests anyway. And they join the protests. Students actually had a vivid debate amongst themselves early on that, should we or should we not support the Bazaaris? And what is the class nature of the bazaar? Because bazaar includes both merchants and people who employ others, but people who are employed themselves. But they finally join in because they see it as a broad regime protest. Then you have sort of pensioners and different people at different points. Then you have the Gen Z who are obviously repressed in a particular way, whose basic ways of life are suppressed and who have a lot of bravery that comes from youth. And they come out. And unfortunately, as we know, in the last round of protests, many Gen Z were killed in 2022-23. And Iranians, including the younger Gen Z, look at them as heroes, as people who came out before and as martyrs of their movement. So the point is that there's a lot of different people with different goals. And then we have the sort of media sphere. So, we talked about Reza Pahlavi as an opposition figure abroad. So his supporters are obviously galvanized and they have sort of their figure. Some people have chanted the slogans in favor of him for sure inside Iran. There are people here inside Iran who support him. Some people then film this and put it out there. But the reality is, of course, Mr. Pahlavi does not have some sort of a broad support of all these people or anything like a network. He has claimed himself to be the transitional leader of the movement, which I think is a sort of a very dangerous claim to make, because if you make that claim, then you need to be able, well, now is the test, right? And he's given all the calls. He's asked people to come out. Well, when Ayatollah Khomeini did this in 1978-79, he was able to actually bring about a regime change. It falls down to Mr. Pahlavi now. If he truly is seen as a transitional leader, and as his supporters claim, 80-90% of Iranians support him, he should be able to bring about change. Now, of course, he won't be able to, because he doesn't have because the reality of Iran is that it's much more contested. There are really, Iranians are much more divided. He has some support, as I said, right? I think he has significant support, in fact. But it's not majority support, number one. Number two, even the support that he has is not organized. He's never had built a successful organization in his life. He did, there has been attempts. He's been more serious in, let's say, the last year or so in terms of building different political organizations. But now is the test. In politics also, we can all have podcasts and talk about how great we are. But the politics, the test of it is doing it, right? The test of politics is doing it. It's action, right? So I can talk about how brilliant my ideas are. But in let's say in democratic countries, the test is you win or you lose, right? In non-democratic countries, it's how you can mobilize people, how you can show that you're able to achieve your political goals. And the reality is, as I said, Mr. Pahlavi doesn't have that much abilities there. But the rest of the Iranian opposition, I agree with Shayan, by the way. It would have behooved them if they were serious politically, and this is my own people in many ways, like the sections of the opposition that I belong to. If we were serious enough, should have organizations, figureheads. We don't, right? There's nothing like that, nothing approaching that exists yet outside Iran. And as for inside Iran, repression is heavy. So we have figures like Narges Mohammadi, Nobel Peace Laureate, Mustafa Tajzadeh, former interior minister, who has called, by the way, Mustafa Tajzadeh called for Ayatollah Khamenei to either accede to people's demands or resign. He has called for free elections for a constituent assembly. This is significant. So former reformists like Tajzadeh now make demands effectively for regime change, for a democratic transition. Tajzadeh supports a democratic transition, as does Mir Hossein Mousavi, former prime minister, as do so many others. But they've not yet been able to build a political force to put themselves, to be seen as someone who can lead the people, or to build the sort of organizations that can make that happen. So you have diverse protesters demographically, but as I said, with diverse demands, by the way, right here, and with diverse things.
So they're not all asking for the same thing then at this point.
Well, they are, they are and they're not, because, they are asking for better economic conditions, right? They're asking for a change in the regime. They're asking for different people to be in charge. Look, I'm not particularly that young, as you would know. And yet, as this big man that is sitting here, I'm turning 38 soon. My entire life since I was 1 year old, only one man has ruled Iran, and that's Ayatollah Khamenei. And this is also the man who, when our country was attacked by Israel and America, hid like a mouse in a bunker for 12 days. So, this is someone who is not fit to be leader. So I think when people want Khamenei gone and when they want a different regime, they're making a very reasonable demand. They're saying, you're someone even someone who was good shouldn't rule a country this long, but you haven't been good. Iran in every way is doing worse now than it was 20 years ago, right? Economically is doing worse. International relations is doing worse. Culturally is doing worse. Politically is more repressive, right? Who wants that? I mean, who wants a country that is doing worse today than it's doing 20 years ago? So they do want the same thing in this way, right? That they want this change. And I think broadly Iranians, if they could, have a piece of paper and determine what kind of life and a government they want, they do have broad similarities. But to translate that to politics is altogether a different point, right? And that's the job of political leaders, by the way. And that's the job that the political leaders have failed in the opposition. I mean, it's important to realize that, right? This is how it works. In politics, let's say, in the United States, imagine if when you wanted to go to the presidential elections, you had 6 different people running that didn't, that represented different things. And then, who would come out of the ballot box would be totally sort of arbitrary based on that. But it's not. You have 2 choices because political figures determine, they come together, they say, okay, we have 2 candidates, Republican and Democrat, right? So if you don't like the kind of policies of the Republicans, you go for Democrats, and that represents a broad front, right? So my point is, it's the political leaders who put options on the table for people who then they can choose from, right? Not everybody can be their own political party and their own leader. The figures in the professional political activists, politicians of the opposition have failed to come together and to offer a united option to the people. I should also say, and this is true inside and outside Iran. Now, inside Iran, they have a good excuse, so to speak, which is the repression, right? So repression is so hard that it's very hard to organize. Mustafa Tajzadeh has to send his calls from inside the prison. Narges Mohammadi has to send her calls from inside prison, right? So it's very important to realize that. Outside, there is no such excuse. People, they've been free, but they haven't been able to do that. I should also add that, of course, there is politics inside the regime. Many people inside the regime are also fed up with Khamenei. They're fed up with his policies. So Danny said, until Khamenei is there, in many ways, I think the post-Khamenei era has actually began in Iran already, because the guy he's going to be 87 in April. And if any of you have elders in that age, I hope that they live to 200 years. But we don't have the similar hope for Mr. Khamenei, who is also not doing very well, right? So when you're 80, when you're almost 87, that's obviously the twilight of your life, right? Politically, especially. So the chances that he's pushed aside is a lot. And frankly, given the fact that the Iranian opposition and pro-democracy activists and all that have not built organized forces yet, it's likely that the initiative for change can come from inside, different factions of the regime who have huge differences with each other or what the future will be, will fight with each other and will come up with the next configuration. The job then of the pro-democracy activists and others would be then how to react to those conditions and how to plot their next moves.
Yeah,
And
Negar, if I can add important things of Arash. Definitely, I think that probability-wise, I think a change within the regime is much more probable than change of the regime, because I think that we can see movements happening. Actually, I agree with Arash that the Khamenei period is still there, but in a way we see even former President Rouhani criticizing him. And you have back and forth, and definitely things are happening behind the scene, even before the riot started, demonstration started. So definitely, it creates a movement that we cannot foresee what will happen, but things are happening. We also keep saying in Israel, Iran, it's not a monolith, and this regime is not a monolith. You cannot compare between what Larijani thinks and what Fakpour thinks. 2 different way of thinking, and we have to understand that. So definitely can happen that can change the regime from within, and we have to be very, very alert to that. One other thing I just want to add is, when you're looking in hindsight about, everything related to the catch-22 that this regime is in, is very interesting because, at the beginning, they built a nuclear program to build a bomb. They forgot the bomb, and they continued building the program. And then it became so massive that it gave justification to Israel to attack. Now, after the attack, they cannot accept anything less than allowing enrichment in Iran. But this is not aligned with the U.S. demands, so there cannot be some sort of an agreement that I think President Trump is willing to do so unless the Iranians will forgo the enrichment. They cannot because of the basic red line of the regime itself. So they cannot reach an agreement with the U.S. that they understand that it's crucial to lifting sanctions. And they're preserving an enrichment that now they're not enriching in Iran because I think even if they have the capacity, they're not sure what will happen if they start enriching again. So this kind of dilemma is really, when you're looking at that, you understand this is one of the core problems the regime is tackling because his strategy is causing him so many problems. They feel that if they will forgo enrichment, then it's a collapse of the regime. But if they're not forgoing the enrichment, then they cannot reach an agreement, and the situation will stay as it is, even if they will find solution that will be cosmetic, like I mentioned, or changing the gods, or even if they will change pedestrian or whatever, it won't change the basic problem that they have within the regime itself. So I think, again, we don't know what will happen. As we said that numerous times, we don't know how things develop toward the future. We know what we need to look at to see how things will develop. But I really, given the multiple scenarios that we can encounter ourselves, we should be ready for surprises. That's one. And second, I think that, let's continue what Arash said, I totally agree that these demonstrations are coming in a very unique situation of the revolution. It's not a very, it's not an ordinary situation. Basically, after the 12-day war, things started to move even rapidly in terms of the succession discussion, everything related to the situation in Iran. And I think definitely this meets the demonstrations. We know, as we said, there is no unified opposition, there are no unified demands, but we have to wait and see how things will develop. And even if this regime will stand the demonstrations, maybe this will create another wave of change within the regime itself. So definitely a lot of things to look at in the recent or in the upcoming days and weeks in Iran.
Shayan, what do you make of that, pulling on that thread from Danny, change within the regime versus regime change as a result of these protests?
You know, let's take a few steps back. As far as change from within, the people of Iran are sick and tired of hearing the same old rhetoric from the people who were, up to a certain point, part of the propaganda of that regime. So long as people who were a part of the regime continued their dialogue in the format of the Islamic Republic, they're not going to go anywhere with the people of Iran. For example, as long as the idea of the supremacy of a supreme leader, Velayat Faqih, is in place, the people of Iran will not agree and accept anybody from within or from without to express anything. So the people of Iran are looking for somebody who does not have a clear association with the Islamic Republic. I agree. Arash mentioned a few people, Mir Hossein Mousavi or Tajzadeh, but these people are entangled with the Islamic Republic for as much as they want to absolve themselves of responsibility or say, hey, I'm a reformed person. I'm a better person now. Their legitimacy is not believable for the people of Iran. That's why they continue to strive for something that is dissociated completely from the Islamic Republic. Now, I do not disagree with the fact that there is a possibility that the Islamic Republic will morph into something new. Say, for example, they will find an Erdogan type for Iran from within who would say, you want some economic freedom? We agree. You want some personal freedom? Fair enough. So long as the IRGC is involved and in charge of the economy and they can manipulate the bazaar, then you can have some of the freedoms that you want, and then let's just all be happy. That is a distinct possibility, and the people of Iran might actually fall for that, because why? In the absence of real water, people accept mirage. And because of what we are going through right now, the people of Iran are looking for a savior. But the only fact is, nobody is telling them that the savior is within. The savior is their continued resistance. And this is something that Iranians, for the duration of the Islamic Republic, have been warned against, that everybody is against you. The only people who are supporting you, for example, this propaganda that started during the 12-day war or entanglement, whatever nowadays they're calling it. And they keep saying to the people, oh, this was an attack by Israel and the United States. This was not. This was a stupidity of the Islamic Republic for continuously saying something that Israel needs to be wiped off the face of the earth, and Israel found it legitimate for itself to defend its right to exist. This is what the people of Iran are upset about, and therefore they are not going to fall for any of the people from within. Now, people from without or from outside, I think the best potential solution for even the Western governments to accept that, hey, there is a legitimate group that can take this is an amalgamation of different forces coming under one umbrella, and all of them agreeing to the fact that we are only doing this for a transition period, and none of us will be in charge of a future Iran in whatever shape or form the people of Iran decide the form of their governance to be.
So can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree, and I've advocated for a very long time precisely for that, i.e., for a broad coalition, the Iranian opposition that would put together, let's say, someone like, actually, we always said sort of from Tajzadeh to Reza Pahlavi. It also rhymes in Persian because Tajzadeh means born out of a crown, so he's born out of a crown. So a broad front. But there are two things that needs to be said here. First of all, Reza Pahlavi and his movement, for the last, especially a year and a half ago, have decided very clearly that this is not what they want. They make the rest of the Iranian and I'm being purely analytical. It has nothing to do with what political tendencies I have, really.
No, we will debate facts. We will debate facts.
Sure, the fact. In the last year or so, Reza Pahlavi's team, and this is, and who you pick as your team really decides who you are. I'm not talking about some random accounts on Twitter. People, his chief of staff, people serving him, people serving in institutions that are close to him, have made it very clear that they consider major parts of the Iranian opposition their enemy as much as they consider the regime their enemy. I'll give you examples. Narges Mohammadi, Nobel Peace Laureate, was actually stoned by supporters of Pahlavi. They threw stones at her in Iran just a few weeks ago, and this was broadly praised by Pahlavi's supporters abroad. And when she won the Nobel Prize, the kind of message of congratulations that Pahlavi sent her, was not unlike the messages the Iranian president gives very sort of begrudgingly when some Iranian who they don't like does something well. His supporters, his again, chief people close to him, attacked Narges Mohammadi. They've spent all these last couple of years attacking Narges Mohammadi. And let's be very clear, this is Narges Mohammadi. This is someone who has spent most of her adult life in prison, right? So not only she's not an insider.
The people of Iran also have some misgivings about her.
Sure,
she has not been transparent about some of her activities.
So let me finish. Let me finish. So you can say all these things, right? That some people, of course, people of Iran are divided. They like different people, and they have some misgivings about her or whatever. But she's a major figure of the opposition. I'm giving as examples. Taron Ali Dusti is another figure. He's an actress. Like, it's impossible not to love this figure if you hate the regime, right? She's a woman who refused to wear a job, paid the highest price, was thrown into jail, really gave up her career at the top of her height of her career to go to prison to show support for the movement. When a documentary was shown about her in BBC Persian a few days ago, she galvanized this big figure in Iran. The monarchist camp immediately started attacking her, immediately. And again, I'm not talking about monarchists. I don't mean random accounts on Twitter. I mean chief leading figures. So politically, it's very clear that this illusion doesn't exist anymore. The reality is Mr. Pahlavi and his camp have decided that they don't see the rest of us as potential allies. They see us as their enemies. It's very clear. If he wants to change that, he could. I want to also remind us, of course, that one of the slogans they now use is deaf to the left, right? Deaf to the left. I.e., they want leftists like me to die, right? Not only they don't want us, you can't want to partner with someone who wants you to die. And again, this is a slogan that his wife, Yasmin Pahlavi, has said, and others in that camp have said repeatedly. So a great achievement of the Islamic Republic, first of all, is this division that exists right now. And I don't think it's only Mr. Pahlavi's camp to blame, to be clear. I started talking about him. I don't think it's only his camp to blame. I think those on the other side are also to blame for this. They didn't embrace him, and we could talk about it. But effectively, it's very clear that this is not what they want. If Mr. Pahlavi wanted to do this, he should get rid of his advisors, get other ones, declare openly that that's his goal, and then the same onus can then be put on the others, right? Whoever the others are, to say, but this is not where we're going. And the other point about, whether Iranian people will accept someone from inside the regime and all that, right? Because it came up, and Danny also mentioned it. Look, depends what we mean by accepting. But the fact is, yes, this is, Iranians, when they don't like the regime, they don't like any of its different factions and figures and all that, right? But the reality is, if certain figures from inside the regime are able to come to power and change certain things and transform the regime, they'll probably have a honeymoon period with certain sections of the population. If they're able, let's say some generals come to power and they don't give people democracy, but they lessen the social repression, they solve the problems with Israel and America, they're able to improve the Iranians' economy. Iranians can't wait forever for the perfect figure to arise. So they'll probably give them at least a period of honeymoon. I think those of us who are pro-democracy, right, then we'll have to say, okay, how do we confront these new dictators, this new authoritarian power? Which we would also, the other point about the Pahlavi camp is that they're not pro-democracy. We'll be very clear about this. Not
Well,
neither.
This is where we go wrong, because if we accuse one side of not being pro-democracy and not agreeing or accepting the other side's fallacies, then we are creating another ambiguity for the people of Iran.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, let me finish this point. Let me finish this point, and then I'll get to you. But the point I'm trying to make is that, for example, when a cartoonist attacks Reza Pahlavi's wife, who had suffered from cancer, and makes a mockery out of that, you can't expect people to fall in love with the other side. You can't expect the other side to.
I thought that was terrible, and I condemn it, to be clear.
Yeah.
To address that, I think what Tukan Estani did in that regard was terrible, and I condemn it.
Yeah. And this is not a back and forth between you and I. I will die on the fact that I may disagree with Arash Azizi until tomorrow politically, but he will remain my friend no matter what. Because in this area, this is what I want to impart, is that even if we disagree politically, we are not enemies. We are fighting for one cause, and that cause is, believe me, neither Arash Azizi nor Shayan Samii are applying to become the next foreign minister of Iran. What we are trying to do is we are trying to bring the same democracy that we enjoy in where we live right now to the people of Iran, so they can freely discuss their opinions just like the two of us, and at the end of the day still remain friends. Arash will remain my friend no matter what he says. I will defend his right to be as disagreeable with me as possible. Why? Because I love democracy. This is what we are trying to teach. But aside from that is the fact that I agree. The monarchist side, they have not come out with a solidified approach for the people. When you talk about a transition period, but then you have a plan, a 5-year plan, that is a governance plan. You are giving people a double standard. People cannot understand. Are you just for the transition period, or are you planning a long term? You have every right to plan for long term and advocate that to the people and get people to your side to vote for you. But you have to wait until that opportunity for voting comes around. So what I'm trying to impart is that the people of Iran are tired. The people of Iran, why do they keep going into the streets and asking Netanyahu for help? Why do they think that Trump is their savior? Because they have been given so many false hopes that they don't know what to believe anymore. For example, Danny mentioned about the 12-day war. The people of Iran were scared for their lives. Nobody was left in Tehran to come out and protest against the regime or to agree. Everybody keeps saying that people in Iran were not in agreement with the attacks. That is not the case. But even the public polling that was done by Gaman Institute so showcases that. But what we need to do is we need to be transparent with the people of Iran. Don't lie to them. People of Iran can read through everything. And people of Iran are not like the 1979 group of people who lived. Arash mentioned something correct, that Khamenei made an announcement and thousands of people would come to the streets. Why? Because the people would receive some kind of funding that was available through the mosques. Mosques would dole out money so people would not go to work and go to protests. But right now, mosques have become sites of corruption. So you can't have something like that either. That's why I think people need transparency, people need freedom of thought, and people need honesty.
And Danny, just so I can get your voice too in this matter, just a final concluding thought briefly.
Yeah, well, I think that maybe it's unpopular point of view, but I think that if the regime will find a way to improve the economic situation in Iran, I think that will be a decisive development in terms of the demonstrations. I think that people in Iran will be content with this regime as long as the economy will improve. Although, despite the fact the majority probably they don't like the regime, or some of them are, I think, fed up with this regime. But I think that it all comes down to the economy. That's why what I think. I think that if the regime will find a way, it will be very hard, as we mentioned, because of the major challenges that he has and the catch that he's in terms of negotiation with the US. But if they will find a way to do so, I think that the regime will be able to recover and to preserve its dominance, even though it still have legitimacy problems. But I think that it comes down to the economy. That's my way of thinking. I truly hope they're going to be, of course, a regime change in Iran, a positive one. That opposition will take over. I really hope, in Israel, we yearn for everything related to before 1979 and the tensions that we had with Iran previously. But even if it won't be like that, and the regime change will be focused more on the internal part, I think it'll be a positive development. But here again, I'll say one last thing about that. I think that not every regime change in Iran is a positive change. Again, we don't know how things will develop. There are elements that can take over and use the current situation, and very negative elements that they will use their force, the brutal force, in order to create peace and quiet. I don't know how it's going to sustain, but we have to take that into consideration itself. The other thing I would say, very interesting development. We don't know. We know it's those events are, we can analyze them maybe only in hindsight. We know where they're going to finish. When a mix of things, everything is out of the open in terms of the opportunities that can happen. And I think definitely, I'm saying in Israel, we have to wait and see how things will develop. But definitely, if the regime will able to overcome and create a peace and quiet and continue the false buildup of the missiles, especially the missiles, and even if we turn back to enrichment, then those protests will end, but the regime will have another mounting problems in terms of Israel probably preparing to attack again. So definitely 2026, that starts today or tomorrow, wherever you are, will be very interesting in terms of everything related to the Iranian developments on the ground.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for the conversation. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and I wish you all the best, everyone, for the new year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Danny, Happy New Year to all of you.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu met at Mar-a-Lago. Trump says the U.S. would back Israeli strikes if Iran rebuilds core military capabilities after the June war. Meanwhile, Israeli officials are increasingly talking about regime change. They see it as something necessary, even if they insist that the change must come from within Iran. So is regime change a strategy, a fantasy, or something in between? Joining me, Alan Eyre, the former Obama-era negotiator, Alex Vatanka, senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, and Joseph Epstein, director of the Turan Research Center at the Yorktown Institute. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me today. And welcome. Oh, wonderful. Alex, let's start with you. Trump says he isn't pursuing regime change. It's obvious that, Israel clearly wants it, but says it must come from the Iranian people, although current and former Israeli officials are advocating for it and encouraging Iranians to take the streets. How do you read that?
No, I think fundamentally, politically, President Trump has always been against the business of regime change somewhere else in the world. I mean, that's basically, in terms of his politics, that's probably one of the most known attributes that we can associate with him. So, in that sense, I don't think he's going to publicly change that. I think he's going to still come out, and in recent days, we've heard him kind of say the same thing. He doesn't want to talk about regime change. He's more concerned about what Iran does with its nuclear program, its missiles, and its posture in the region. But I think perhaps what could happen is that President Trump changes his mind if the process that might look like it's going to end in regime change begins at some point. So I think he wants to be on the winning side. And arguably, you can make the point that's one of the reasons he sort of joined, if you will, the 12-day war back in this summer. U.S., as we all know, didn't participate from get-go, but joined the war effort, certainly targeted those Iranian sites for Natanz and Isfahan. Sort of at the end of that conflict, perhaps one could read that to suggest that if he thinks the cost-benefit analysis makes sense for him, that he's politically going to survive, that it's going to make him look like a strong leader who knows what he's doing, that he's going to finally, after almost 50 years of bad blood with the Islamic Republic, get this regime to sort of give in, if you will, then he'll do it. But if you tell him from get-go, will cost you something similar to what the United States had to pay back in 2003, for example, with going into Iraq and nation building, all the rest of it, he knows politically that's not what his base voted him in for. He's not there himself, I think, as a man. But as I said, if the process is started by somehow Israel or by the Iranian people themselves, and he feels that he might be on the winning side and he should throw his hat in, he might just do that. But I don't think he's going to do that from get-go, and I certainly don't think he's there right now.
Well, that's really interesting. Alan, what do you think about that? And given your experience in the U.S. government, is regime change a workable policy framework? And what do you make of Israel advocating and pushing for Iranians to go onto the street and for this regime change?
Israel, I mean, it's a fantasy. Regime change is wildly improbable in Iran right now. And it's not even what Israel wants. Israel doesn't necessarily want regime change. It wants this regime so degraded in function that it no longer poses a threat. It sees the Islamic Republic of Iran as an existential threat. So it not only wants to destroy its nuclear capability, it not only wants to destroy its missile capability, it wants to so enervate and weaken the government that it can't project power outside its borders. That's a lot easier to do than regime change. And by regime change, I mean a regime that's friendlier to Israel than this one. They could very well blunder into regime change, but if this regime topples, the successor regime is more likely to be in many ways as bad or worse than this one. So regime change for a pro-Western, pro-Israeli regime, it might be Israel's policy goal, but that's an incredible long shot.
What do you think, Joseph? Is it even feasible?
I don't believe it would be feasible from the Israeli side. You have to keep in mind that Iran is a nation of 90 million people, whereas Israel is about 1/10 of the size. In addition, I mean, just getting the soldiers over that would be necessary for occupation doesn't seem very realistic.
And a question for all of you, if regime change actually happened, and of course it's too early to tell, how would that unfold in the Iranian context? Alan, you touched on that a little bit. Can you tell us more, Alan, and then Alex, and then Joseph?
Well, again, I think we have to define terms. When you say regime change, the regime is already changing. It's changed since June. They lost most of their strategic decision makers. The guy in charge has lost a couple of steps. Ayatollah Khamenei seems far weaker and less in control than he was a year ago. So you've already got regime change. The regime is always changing. But I mean, I think it's more possible that the regime will change to a more nationalistic, more secular, more militaristic one that's guided by the IRGC. Then we get a pro-Western or monarchist, pro-Israel one. So how would regime change unfold? It's like the book by Charles Kurtzman, The Unthinkable Revolution. No one knows. And anyone who tells you that he or she does know is wrong.
And actually, I was going to ask you also, Alan, given your expertise in the government, what signs do you look out for, right, when something like that is about to unfold? And what is it? And do you see any of that happening currently with the protest movement that we're seeing right now in Iran?
I mean, you just go to base rates. I mean, I look at the protests currently happening in Iran, and this is a recurring phenomena that happens every few years. It's happening now. The spark that set this particular flame off was the economic insufficiencies, and this will continue going forward, because one thing that is true is that the Islamic Republic of Iran is fundamentally unable to provide essential goods and services to its own people in any sort of realistic, comprehensive manner. And in today's world, it's getting harder and harder to do that. It's harder now because of sanctions on Iran, especially after snapback happened. And the collective confidence the Iranian people have in their leadership is causing the currency to plummet. So the signs I'm looking out for, I don't know, because if there were a revolution in Iran, it wouldn't be like the last one. The last one, you saw tons of people in the street, and that touched off a revolution. But the difference there was there were opposition forces that were organized, and you don't have that now. So I'm not looking for regime change. I'm looking for system collapse. And that's quite possible.
What do you think about that, Alex?
Look, I mean, to use a cliche, in sort of a revolutionary moment, street protests are the last phase of a process that leads to a state collapse, not the first phase. I mean, that we know from 1979. Khomeini didn't return to Iran because of the protest. There had been months, if not years, of planning, of anger, grievances that sort of came around. That at that particular moment, this issue of the Shah had to go. I think something like that is not in place right now. In that sense, I do agree with Alan, but I do also want to go a bit further and point out that I have certainly not ever seen this level of hopelessness inside the Iranian regime. Let's put the protesters and Iranian anger aside. That's been true and a constant factor for many years. This is a regime that a long time ago, probably 45 years ago, would have lost in a free election in terms of whether people wanted it or not. It's not that. What we have today is a system, essentially a rentier economy that is kind of starting to show signs that it can't even keep the minimum of support in place. And that is important because that might be the one sign to look out for. It's sort of defection within the ranks of the regime. Last time we had anything like that, where you saw a clear potential split that meant the Islamic no longer could exist, was back in 2009 with the Rafsanjani crowd, the so-called, green opposition movement, all came around the idea that, it was time for fundamental change, and you had people from the regime joining that call. We all remember that. In recent years, in terms of protests, we haven't seen that. It's been mostly people on the street level going out, and the regime is very good at repressing. And, in by my count, this is the fifth largest set of nationwide protests since 2017. Each time, the regime has been able to repress its way out, but that's not guaranteed that it can continue to do so, not when you keep in mind that we've never been at this particular juncture before. The level of hopelessness is something that I haven't seen before, even been expressed by folks who essentially many times have served this very regime for decades. They just don't see a solution. Let me give you one example of where this hopelessness maybe come from. Look, let's take the sanctions as a key factor behind the economic situation. If you go back to 2002, 2003, when Iran's nuclear program became what it is today, when it was sort of revealed to the world, throughout those 20 plus years, there was sort of baked into the process the prospect that potential negotiations could lead Iran out of this dismal situation it was in. And that's not the case today. Today, the case is, basically the United States is asking Iran to capitulate, given its demand on zero enrichment. The Iranians are not willing to go there for various reasons we can maybe get into later. That means if you're an ordinary Iranian today, seeing your currency plummet, and seeing something new, no prospects for diplomacy to work. And at the same time, you have Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who, as far as I can tell, isn't showing any sign of being willing to change course. This creates a new situation. And on top of all that, you got 86-year-old Ali Khamenei, who's not going to be around forever. He might survive this round of protest. Will he survive another round of protest? I mean, that's the sort of question that we have to ask. So I think, if I had to sort of say, will the Islamic Republic survive or not, probably will survive this round too. But if I'm looking down the road, it's not going to look better, and you can expect more protests. And the question is, are we going to get to a point where the defections within the regime become so great that when we're talking about a system collapse?
And when you speak of this hopelessness, Alex, within the regime, how would you define it in terms of its depth? Is it so strong that these cracks, that would you see potentially like a coup of some sort? And going back to what Alan was saying about maybe even the IRGC taking over?
Look, IRGC has the power to be a player. I don't know if they have the unity in their ranks, because as we all know, IRGC isn't a unitary entity. They got their own divisions within the ranks. They could put their own survival first. They could realize that where Ali Khamenei has led them to, it's not sustainable going forward. And they don't have, unlike the Shah crowd, Pahlavi era, who could get on a plane and go to London, Paris, California, they don't have a plan B. This is it. And surely if you are IRGC, and I think that is true, they know much better than any of us how angry the Iranians are. And they know they're going to be the victims of that anger should things get out of hand. So they do have a reason, not just IRGC, but other entities in the regime, to perhaps think creatively and think that, maybe it's time for Ali Khamenei either to sort of abdicate to some extent some of the powers. And these calls, by the way, are openly being expressed from the likes of Hassan Rouhani and others talking about referendum. Let's have this question. Do we want this system or not? So there are lots of creative ideas out there. IRGC could jump on one of those bandwagons for its own survival and realize that actually it just doesn't have the capacity to stay the course the way it could do 5-10 years ago, when the likes of Qasem Soleimani were going around and saying Iran is going to be the counter model to the Americans, to the West. Nobody in Iran believes that anymore. So it's not about ideologically what's feasible. It's really about survival. And if you're in the business of just surviving, then I wouldn't even discount what IRGC might be willing to do. But, to Alan's point, counter could happen, that they decide that, the more better way forward is to concentrate power in a few hands, to sort of pull themselves together, to speak more in a united voice, and sort of, if you will, go down the North Korean model, which is the opposite of compromise, which is to sort of dig down in their heels and just stay the course. Hugely risky business for them to do that, because Iran is certainly not North Korea, and this anger you're seeing right now is not going to go anywhere. So that's a decision that the folks in IRGC, others who are around Khamenei but are thinking about themselves beyond the day Khamenei is gone, they need to keep that into account.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi just wrote an op-ed for The Guardian where he was basically extending a hand for diplomacy with Donald Trump. But I mean, he made it very clear that he still believes in resistance and that they're not going to give up on the zero enrichment. You pointed out clearly that the U.S., and we learned through a Washington Post investigation with, I believe it was with PBS Frontline, that the Americans did offer to take all the sanctions away should they go to zero enrichment. And they said no. And here we are at this point right now with the economic collapse and with the Bazaaris, who are one of the key pillars of support for the 1979 revolution, protesting and showing their resentment and their anger. So, Joseph, when it comes to Iran and Israel and the recent meeting between Donald Trump and Netanyahu, it seems like the potential for war is more likely between the two nations, or a second round of strikes. What impact would that have on everything that we just discussed?
Well, I think that whether war would actually happen really depends more than anything on Iranian behavior. The Trump-Netanyahu meeting showed that Trump is totally behind Israel in the conflict with Iran. And so let's clarify what this conflict is about. It's not so much, neither the US nor Israel really care that Iran is a Shiite theocracy. If the regime was like Myanmar, brutal but staying within its own borders, there would be no problem. The issue is that they kill Israeli and US citizens, threaten US allies, and collaborate with enemies. Recently, Argentinian media reported on an expansion of Quds Force activity in Venezuela, for example, which is a main focus of the Trump administration right now. And so the critical variables that I would be looking at that would determine whether there will be war or will not is, will Iran continue building its ballistics program? I mean, Trump, I think, is the first US president to say that he would go directly after that. Will they try to restart their nuclear program? Will they try to rebuild their proxy network? And if Iran escalates, I think there is a great chance that we'll see direct conflict. And you have to keep in mind that while this is going on, China is currently simulating blockades around Taiwan. The war in Ukraine drags on. So it will be important for the Trump administration also to send a message to those two countries to prevent further aggression in other places in the world. If Iran backs down, however, I think there is a great chance that we will not see conflict. And there is a good precedent for this of Iran backing down. In 1988, after the peace deal with Iraq, Ayatollah Khamenei famously said that making that compromise was akin to drinking a poisoned chalice. And this sort of set a precedent for the Islamic Republic of occasionally compromising on its ambitions to ensure its survival. And in the backdrop of the current regime fragility, I think this is a very likely scenario.
And any final concluding thoughts, Alan, and then Alex, in terms of that meeting and where this is all headed?
Yeah, I think in many ways Iran is too strategically weak to negotiate. They're very concerned about signaling weakness by acceding to pressure. So I think the road to diplomacy is largely blocked, unfortunately. I think Israel will strike when it finds it propitious tactically. Iran will respond with missiles launched against Israel, and we'll see what happens after that.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, look, we on that issue and that critical issue in terms of what to next, we don't have enough clarity, I think, in terms of what each side wants. Are the Iranians willing to make the sort of adjustments that, for example, they can have a nuclear program, but instead of insisting on enrichment, there is a pathway out of it? People talking about a consortium on an island in the Persian Gulf. Maybe that's it. I don't know. The missiles. I mean, is the U.S. going to insist on the maximalist demand, no missiles, or could it be missiles that are, with a range cap on, or other ways that you can regulate? But really, fundamentally, we can talk about this forever. It's a political problem. As long as the Ayatollahs in Iran, and I'm using the cliche, meaning Khamenei and the man before him, Khomeini, as long as they have that kind of ideological worldview, which he insists to this day to have, then you have a political problem, and all the things that they might be able to achieve around certain issues like the nuclear program, missiles, so they're essentially going to maybe buy us time, but politically it's not going to solve anything. So you need, on the part of Iran, you really need a political decision. I'm very convinced that Khamenei is not the man to do it. A political decision that, what they really genuinely want to start and go in a different direction for the sake of the nation and put the ideology away, if you will. And on the part of the United States, frankly, there's still, to my mind, some great degree of confusion. Is it regime change behavior? As Joseph was saying, but a lot of people actually in Washington and elsewhere think that Iran really ought to be on the side of the United States in this new global order we live in, and that the only thing that's in the way is a regime change. Now, you could say that's nostalgia, that going back to the 1979 prior to that, it's just a dream. But there are a lot of folks who actually believe that's what Iran could be, a country that, through the actions of its own people, will get rid of the Islamic Republic, and we kind of once again become a partner, if not ally, of the United States. So again, you need those political sort of clarities to show themselves, both in Tehran, as I said, but also in Washington. Once you do that, then the prospects of a sustainable detente is much more likely than just playing with one issue or another, because you constantly will end up with one crisis against the other one. Again, history of bad blood here is about half a century old. You're not going to solve that with one agreement.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, Alan, and Joseph, for joining me today on Eye for Iran, and Happy New Year to all of you.
Happy New Year.
Well, one analysis argues that the current protests have 10 defining features that make them broader, more connected, and harder for the regime to control. Joining us now is Bozorgmehr Sharifeddin, head of Iran International Digital, former Reuters journalist, and co-author of a forthcoming book on Iran, to explain his piece, which you can read on our Farsi website. Bozorgmehr, welcome.
Thanks, Negar, for having me.
It's a pleasure. So what makes this protest movement stronger than previous ones?
The movement has started only 4 days, but we already see some signs that we didn't see in previous round of protests. I think one feature that was interesting for me in the international arena is that this movement managed to attract a lot of international attentions in the first few days. As you can see, many major outlets have covered it, but more important than that, Donald Trump reacted to the protest on the first day. This wasn't the norm. We know that under Biden, Obama, usually when there was a round of protests in Iran, US presidents usually prefer to wait to see how things will unfold in Iran. They sometimes waited for weeks to see if the course of events will continue or not. After that, they used to hold meetings with their national security advisors and other advisors to decide how to react to protests in Iran. But this time, on the first day, Trump decided to react, and it was in a meeting with Netanyahu that he reacted to the protest and somehow condemned the brutality of the Iranian regime against the protesters. We should remember this is the first round of protests after the 12-day war against Iran, and that's why there is already a huge international attention and interest around the protest, which is, I think, will put the protest in a good position to because the previous round of protests, many protesters felt that they are unheard, but this one,
Yes.
they are at the center of attention from the beginning.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right from the very get-go. And often you and I both worked in Western media as well. And now the protests are being covered by Western media from, as you mentioned, from the very beginning. And they're acknowledging that this has gone on from, economic demands and has turned into something much greater. And to your point about Trump, when he was with Netanyahu and speaking to the reporters outside of Mar-a-Lago, he actually acknowledged that the Iranian regime often violently crushes the protesters until they see an end on from their perspective.
Yes, you don't see any sign of cautious statements anymore, because in the previous rounds, usually the US presidents try to say something to show support for protesters, but at the same time, they didn't want to undermine the ongoing negotiations with the Iranian government. This time, it's clear that because there is no negotiations, there is no ongoing negotiations, the US president doesn't feel that the statement should be cautious.
And what makes this round of protests harder for the regime to dismiss in terms of their demands?
Look, the beginning of the uprising was among the shopkeepers, mobile sellers. And we should remember, shopkeepers in any country around the world and in Iran, they're among the most resilient part of the society when it comes to economic pressure, because they buy more expensive because of the inflation, but they can sell more expensive and they can protect their margin of interest. But in this round, the protests showed that even the shopkeepers are somehow fed up with the current situation in Iran. this protest is not about inflation. It's not about stagnation. This is about the collapse of Iranian economy. It's because economic activity and business is almost impossible under the Islamic Republic because of these foreign currency fluctuations. They can't even plan for having business activities anymore. Iranian economy is suffering from massive inflation, and it was announced that in the first 6 months of the year, the growth of GDP was negative. So we are seeing a stagnation and inflation at the same time. Is a stagflation in a way. But the protests are targeting something far beyond the economic policy, and they don't have any economic demands either. For example, if I want to compare it to the previous rounds of protests and strikes by Bazaaris and shopkeepers, they were against 2 years ago almost. They were angry about VAT, and their demand was clear that they didn't want a rise in VAT, value added tax. But this time, there is no demand, there is no economic demand. They clearly they are targeting the core of the Islamic Republic and the supreme leader because they believe the fundamental policies of the Islamic Republic and its values are against business. And I think this was the reason that this round of uprising by shopkeepers could attract immediately other unions, like truck drivers, other guilds, other movements, students' movements joined the protest. We know that in previous round of protests, there was no harmony between shopkeepers and students. They come from totally different backgrounds. They have totally different democratic and economic demands. But this time, only on the second day, we saw that student movement joined the shopkeepers movement. That's why it shows that the core. I think both sides have realized that the core demand is very similar, that they are against the core and fundamentals of the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, it's incredibly significant. And of course, the bazaar merchants were a pillar of the 1979 revolution. Why is this psychologically significant for both society and the regime?
That's very important. We know that traditional merchants or bazaar shopkeepers were among the main supporters of Khamenei and his movement before the revolution. They reacted to modernization of the Shah and his economic policies, and they felt that they are threatened. That's why they used their well-organized network to fund the Khomeiни's movement, and they funded the movement so they could pay people on strikes. They could pay people, the families of the prisoners. They were paying for them. So merchants and Bazaaris were a big pillars of the revolution, and they continued to be a big part of big supporters of the Islamic Republic after the revolution. So the protests of Bazaari shopkeepers 4 decades after the revolution, it shows that ideological and financial bond has collapsed. And in that sense, I think it's very significant and symbolic.
Wow, that's a really, really, that's an excellent point. And, some people are asking me to compare it, like you said, to previous protests, like we saw with Women Like Freedom movement, Bloody November in 2019. And one thing I often say is, well, this is not the same regime. This is not the same Islamic Republic in that sense, because so much has happened since then. Two of the most significant events, of course, Women Like Freedom in 2022 to 23, and then most recently, the 12-day war with Israel. So let's talk about that and how has that shaken the control or a sense of control that the regime has?
Absolutely. I think people are braver, and the rulers and the whole system, the ruling system, is much weaker. We live in a situation where the supreme leader still lives in hiding. He can't see his military commanders as he used to see them. He can't have meetings with top officials because of fear of another attack against his life. So we see that there is this sense of insecurity among the Iranian leaders. And when you read newspapers, state newspapers that are supporting the Islamic Republic, they are linking these protests to enemies of the Islamic Republic, and they say these protests are a prelude to a foreign invasion against Iran. And we have seen that many Israeli officials have voiced support for this movement, which will put the Islamic Republic more at unease because they feel that there might be a foreign intervention or foreign military assistance to this uprising, that it will make them even more uncomfortable. So in that sense, yeah, the ruling system is in a very difficult situation because they were before under a lot of international pressures, and now they are under domestic pressure, and these two forces might even join.
And what do you think about the regime's response so far? Khamenei hasn't come out and publicly said anything. What do you make of that?
This is Khamenei's strategy. He always remains silent for a few days or even weeks. I think it will give him time to assess the situation, but at the same time, by doing that, he will pretend to be above the situation, and in a way to show that the situation is not as dramatic as media report. Look, this is in total contrast to what happens in any democratic country. For example, here in the US, if there is a protest in a small city, the president will hold an emergency meeting. The president will go and talk to media. They use that to show that we are in charge of the situation. But in Iran, it's exactly the opposite. To show that they are in charge of the situation, Khamenei prefers to stay silent and to somehow disregard these type of protests. So in a way, I think Khamenei's silence is a sign of weakness because he's running out of explanations. He can come and label these protesters again as seditionists or infiltrators, as he had done in previous decades. But by labeling different parts of the society, he's only alienating more people with the Islamic Republic. So I think that's the dilemma that he has at the moment. In a leader in his situation doesn't have any good options. So remaining silent is the safest.
And speaking of not any good options, does the regime have any cards, so to speak, to play with here? I mean, how can they recover for something like this that you mentioned? You know, it's not something specific like a tax. It's the whole economic collapse of the country.
I think it's too late. You know, it's like someone who is at the on the verge of bankruptcy, someone who has spent all his money on gambling and partying, and all his credit cards are in debt, maxed out, and he doesn't have, like, I don't know, the bank has confiscated his home because he couldn't pay the mortgage. For people who have insisted on wrong policies, sometimes there is no good option. Look at the Iran situation. There is no water, there is no electricity, and you can't fix these shortages. These are the result of decades of mass mismanagement and corruption. And look at what happened to the Iranian nuclear program, for example, a program that cost $1 trillion by the Iranian estimation. It evaporated in a few seconds during the 12-day war. So it means that they have invested their money somewhere that they shouldn't have. So that's the waste of money. So in a sense, I don't think they have a good option, because they had a chance for reform in late 90s, and they decided not to do that. So I think there was a chance, there was a very short window of opportunity if they wanted to do some reforms, but they decided not to do that. And 20 years later, I don't think even a reform is an option anymore. And the president, like, what policy can the president implement to control inflation and the fall of real? Iran is a failed state in a sense. Like, it might not be considered a failed state like Somalia or Afghanistan, but when you look at people's daily life, and when you look at the electricity and water shortages, it is a failed state. And I don't think there is a quick fix anymore.
And when you compare this to women life freedom, what's the biggest difference that you see here, other than, of course, the spark of the movement being different?
I think the current movement is very young. I think we shouldn't be overexcited to think that this movement might finish the Islamic Republic and this is it. I think that the movement is still very young, and it still needs to be tested. I think the first test was to bring other factions and other groups. It managed to bring student movement, which was very, very, very surprising. But after that, we should see if it can bring more ethnic minorities and guilds and unions on board. For example, can it attract oil workers to the movement? Can we see oil workers go on strike in support of this movement? Can we see truck drivers go on strike in support of this movement? I mentioned these two because both of them went on strike in the last year, but separately. I think we should see if these unions and guilds will find one another and support each other's movement. And I think we see a lot of women in this round of protests. The question is, will we see more women joining the protest in the scale that we saw in Women Life Freedom? And Generation Z, we saw a lot of Generation Z in the previous, in Women Life Freedom. We haven't seen many of those young people. They are present in video footages, but they are not dominant. I think the next test for this movement is to spread among different layers of the society. So far, it has managed. It's not an Tehran-focused movement anymore. It managed to spread to other cities immediately. It's not an urban movement. It managed to go to a lot of suburban and small towns. I think the next test for it is whether it can come out of the current layers of the society and bring other layers like workers and more students, women, young people.
And how connected, for example, how strong are unions in Iran? Just to give people in the Western world an idea of the strength or lack thereof of unions inside in Iran.
The Islamic Republic has tried very hard to suppress unions in Iran. And they are, in a sense, we don't have a strong official unions. But we have seen the formation of networks among unions that has been more successful, because these unions, like unofficial unions, they're usually connected through Telegram and other messaging apps, and they can organize. The Islamic Republic in recent decades has tried really hard to suppress and eliminate any chance of networking. When people gather together and create an organization, the Islamic Republic is very much against that. Creation of NGOs and other forms of civil society, the Islamic Republic very intentionally has tried to suppress those entities. But that doesn't mean that we don't have networks and formation of unions. Maybe we see some unions are very strong. So, like, for example, the bus drivers, despite all the pressures in the previous decades and a lot of long prison sentences, they have managed to keep their union. And we have seen that among the oil workers as well. But it's they're functioning under a lot of difficulty, and I should say that that is far beyond the network that they have created themselves unofficially and communications that they have with through the social media and the messaging apps.
And just a final concluding question, your final thoughts, Bozorgmehr, on in terms of how widespread this is and what this says about this movement at this point in time, which it is early, as you mentioned.
In the morning when I was checking the videos, it wasn't that we couldn't see many people on the streets. So I was thinking, okay, this is the fourth day, and maybe the momentum is gone. Maybe the government managed to suppress them because, as you know, the government announced a day off on Wednesday across the country. That was the way to keep many people at home. So I was at the beginning, I thought, okay, maybe that trick worked. But later in the day, as we received a lot of videos from people late at night on the streets, and big crowds of people in many different cities, that I thought, okay, this is far from over. And we saw many people attacking government buildings. We saw that the security forces are firing live ammunition against people. So this is entering into a new phase. I think we see the videos are more violent than previous days. There are reports of death, a casualty, but it's not confirmed yet. They say that maybe an 18-year-old man has been killed in the protest. So we see the momentum is far from over. We can see that the protest is still gaining momentum, and we have seen opposition leaders have called on people to come on the streets. So I think we should wait for more surprises. This is just on in early days, so I think we should be waiting for more scenes to unfold.
There's a lot to look out for. Thank you so much for breaking that all down. Bozorgmehr Sharifuddin joining us on Eye for Iran, and I wish you a very happy New Year.
Thanks, Negar. Thanks for having me.
You can sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, your go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, you can head to our dedicated English website at iranintl.com/en.